Good evening. Thank you for joining this webinar today, February 23rd of 2026, called Culturally Responsive Care in a Time of Collective Trauma. I appreciate everybody joining us today. Before we get started, we'd love for everybody to put in the chat, where are you joining in from tonight or this afternoon if you're from the West Coast? We'd love to know where you're zooming in from. So please take a moment to do that over the next minute, and then we will get started. Thank you very much. So, as you are filling in the chat, telling us where are you joining in from, I want to thank everybody for joining this webinar. And I do want to share a few housekeeping items, please. So, I just want to explain upfront quickly the Q&A versus chat functions. Please use the chat to introduce yourself and share your thoughts. Tonight, we have two moderators, Michaela from the defensive line and Vera from AFSP, who will be sharing resources in the chat during the webinar. For questions that you would like to ask the panelists, please send those by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. At the end of the session, we will try to answer as many as these as possible. For those we will not get to, we will reply back via email. The other thing that we'd like to share prior to getting the panel started is please know this is a safe space. And if you need to talk to someone, you can text HUDDLE, that's HUDDLE, to 741-741. That's HUDDLE, HUDDLE, to 741-741. As a quick reminder, the other housekeeping item is that this panel is being recorded. The video will be available on our social media and YouTube channels after the event ends. So be sure to follow us at the defensive line. So once again, thank you for joining us this February 23rd of 2026. My name is Chris Thomas. I am one of the co-founders of the defensive line, along with my wife of 40 years, Martha, and son Solomon. And on behalf of the defensive line team, we are glad you are here. The defensive line is a nonprofit focused on ending the public health crisis of youth suicide by equipping parents, educators, coaches, leaders of young people with the tools to identify and address youth who are in crisis. And unfortunately, we are in a state of crisis. I know a lot of you have probably seen or heard about the recent death by suicide of Rondell Moore. And unfortunately, that is not the exception. Unfortunately, each week for people under the age of 24, there are 119 people dying by suicide. That's two-thirds the size of a Boeing 737. And then for youth of color, since 2018, the suicide rates are up 54%, but the general population is down 17%. So that's why the defensive line has a vision of creating a world where no young person of color dies by suicide. And we believe these type of events, these type of discussions and conversations are going to help the public reduce suicide. So I am so happy to have four excellent panelists with me here today. I am not going to read their bios. Their bios are in the landing page. But I have with me Takia Blackman, co-founder of the Black People Die by Suicide. Autumn Lockwood, associate performance coach from the Philadelphia Eagles. Jennifer Apar Udu, licensed professional counselor, and Vic Armstrong, Vice President of Health and Equity Engagement at AFSP. Panelists, welcome. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge, your stories, your experience, your expertise. And I'm actually going to start today's panel by asking Jen a quick question here. And it's regarding, we know you're, a practitioner and clients see you every day. What are some common signs that a client stresses or reveals that shares that they have had issues of racial trauma that is not individual, but it's mainly societal? What would you say, what are some of the things that you've noticed in their experience, and what approach do you think needs to change?
Yeah, so Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm so happy to be here. So, one of the clearest signs that a client's stress is rooted maybe in systemic or racial trauma, it actually, to most therapists, looks just kind of very similar to a baseline trauma. But racial trauma is more connected to their identity. And so, their distress sometimes exists even when nothing in their personal life seems wrong. So, there's the times that maybe they come in and they're talking about something, a specific issue. But then that same thread of shame or who am I or not really knowing how to exist within the world still stays there. And so they're functioning, but maybe they're exhausted, hyper aware of, how they're perceived or constantly managing themselves. And they're doing all of this to feel safe, to feel
Mm,
protected.
mm,
And so it might come across as perfectionism, silence, self-abandonment, sometimes even self-sabotage or overworking themselves. And so these are not like personality traits. And sometimes it comes off as like in our community, we hear all the time, the strong Black woman. Sometimes that's what it comes off as. And it's just a survival strategy to really survive what has kind of been happening over years, hundreds
mm,
of years, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
so another key indicator though is that these symptoms will often like spike in response to collective events. And
Mm,
so
mm,
a policy change, a public incident, a video that's shared on social media, even just the subtle workplace dynamics or microaggressions that you're experiencing. It's not just personal stressors, it's those big things that then kind of come up behind some of the everyday things that you're dealing with and add a lot of fire and fuel to just what's happening. And so you might feel more irritated. You might even feel like heavy within your body, like you can't even get up. You'll experience maybe some tension in your body or just, yeah, not really knowing who you are. It's almost like someone comes and flips a switch and you're just like, okay, what just happened? What do I do with all of this? And those are just nervous system responses. And so when I recognize that within clients, we often will just kind of say, okay, so what's going on? What's happening underneath all of this? Who do you think you need to be accepted? Who do you think, what are people telling you about who you are? And let's kind of, dissect that a bit. And so that means validating the reality of the stressor and supporting their nervous system and helping clients relieve survival roles like overfunctioning and self-silencing or self-abandonment in order to protect them. And so in my practice, we focus a lot on somatic and body-based therapy. And so that focuses on building safety within the body so that we can then expand our capacity to hold, challenging emotions or emotions that just feel uncomfortable. So your body holds the language sometimes for your emotions. So tension, that means something. A
mm,
headache sometimes can mean something. A stomach ache out of nowhere,
mm,
heaviness in your body. All of that means, something. And so I don't want to ever downplay the reality of the racial issues someone is facing. We shift to using our nervous system in a way that it was designed, and that was to help us when we're in threat. And so instead of using our nervous system like the fight or flight or that shutdown mode as a baseline for living, we shift out of that. And that means creating new ways to cope and deal with stress. And so, yeah,
mm,
we're all trying to cope with it, whether you're addressing it or from an avoidance standpoint or a dissociated state. That's okay. That's a survival mechanism, and we can kind of help with that. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Wow, thank you. That's excellent. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Jen. Autumn, I'm going to turn to you. As a representative from the sports world, can you share how you've seen collective trauma show up in Black athletes, especially in spaces where toughness, performance, and silence are rewarded? As a coach, how do you guide athletes through this?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, guys. I'm Autumn Lockwood, and I've been with Chris and Martha here for 2 years now, just
Mhm,
about.
yeah, yeah.
But I'm so happy to be here. And to answer your question, yeah, I think collective trauma is something that is big, especially in the African American population with our athletes. I think a lot of kind of what Jennifer was saying, their identity is connected to their performance. And so
Mm,
a lot of times when a game isn't going as they thought they would, or they drop a pass or they make a mistake that kind of lives with them for so long because of the environment that we're in. And so you kind of go into, oh my gosh, like if my identity is attached to this, then when something goes wrong, I'm kind of spiraling because I don't know where I'm rooted at. I know I'm valued for my performance, and that's what a lot of my life is. And so I try to make sure that I'm checking in on them as a human, like as a coach walking them through this. I'm checking on them as a human. I'm checking in and seeing, okay, hey, I know this mistake happened. We can't do anything about it. So the talk of control what you can control is really important. And then moving on to the next one. You have 18 weeks in order
Mhm.
to create and do something special. And so one game doesn't define who you are. And
Mhm.
for me, my faith is so big. And so that's been really, really cool since I've been
Mhm.
with the Eagles year after year. Every year builds with more guys just talking about our faith. And so I kind of remind them, excuse me, to remember whose they are instead of having their identity connected to their performance. I'm saying, hey, no, remember whose you are. Remember your purpose is so much bigger than the actual game or your position or your job right here. It's just making sure that you stay connected to that. And then, just like I said, checking in on them as a human, making sure if I'm noticing any other like pattern of like different behavior that they're doing, I'm checking in and saying, hey, like, are you doing okay? How's your spirit? How's your heart? I
Mhm.
kind of try to stay away from, hey, you good? Because then you only typically get back, yeah, I'm good. And then just kind of leave it at that. So I try to ask a little bit more deeper questions. And then if it continues to persist, I'm going to refer them to our in-house therapist and make
Mhm.
sure that she knows that what's going on and they know that they have her as a resource, and then just constantly checking in on that as well.
That's great. Thank you so much, Autumn. That's great. Really appreciate that. Wow. Vic, I'm gonna turn to you. In your work, you have engaged Black faith leaders in talking about mental health and suicide with the congregations. And we know, as Autumn just mentioned about faith and with the Eagles, faith communities play a powerful role in how Black communities understand suffering, healing, and resilience. During times of collective trauma, what narratives within faith spaces do you think are most impactful to Black mental health, and how can faith leaders foster honest, life-saving conversations, Vic?
That's a good question. I think for me, there are a couple of things I think that you have to kind of differentiate when it comes to the working with faith-based organizations because it is a mixed bag. Faith is definitely uh, a support for people in the Black community, but it has also been the source of a lot of stress for people in the
Mm,
Black community, especially when it pertains to, as it pertains to things around mental health. So when I say you have to kind of differentiate, when I think about the way that we interact, the way that when I interact with faith-based organizations, I don't really I don't really interact with those programs as religious programs.
mm,
I'm interacting with those programs as access points
mm,
because the church has always been a part of the Black community. It has been our refuge
mm,
when we have found ourselves struggling. We find ourselves struggling uh, socially, when we find ourselves struggling emotionally, when we find ourselves struggling financially. The church has been the place that we have turned to. And so the church has that kind of relationship with communities. But I use my own situation as an example. I grew up in a rural town in eastern North Carolina, son of a preacher. My father was a pastor for
mm,
48 years. And all the time that I was growing up, I never one time heard my father or his peers talk about mental health
mm,
from the pulpit. And we didn't talk about mental health at home unless it was in the context of we should not be experiencing mental health challenges.
mm.
We didn't talk about suicide unless we were talking about suicide in the context of it being the unpardonable sin.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we have to work through when we introduce faith-based organizations, faith-based communities to the Black community or any community as a resource around mental health is we first have to deal with the fact that it has not been a consistent message coming from faith-based organizations.
Mhm.
The message primarily from faith-based organizations has been that if you had strong enough faith, you would
Right.
not be experiencing the
Right.
challenge that you are experiencing. And too often their remedy for what you are experiencing has been you need to pray harder, you need to
Mhm.
have more faith,
Right.
You just need have a little talk with Jesus.
Mm,
I grew up in a church where we sang a song, Jesus on the main line. We didn't sing therapist on the hotline. So we have been socialized to think about where we go in a very, very specific way. And so, but the other thing with the faith-based community is whenever there has been trauma, whenever there's been tragedy in the community, the church has shown up. So
hmm.
the church has been that consistent resource for those kind of things. The church has also been the way that we have signaled to people outside of our community what's important to us. That's why you see politicians show up at the black churches on Sunday morning, clapping all off beat, but they're in the house because they recognize that the church is what's going to signal to our community what's important to us. And so there's that role for the church. The thing that I try to get faith leaders to understand is a couple of things. One is that it's not a question of if you have people in your congregation that are struggling with mental health challenges. It's not a question of if you have people in your congregations that are impacted by suicide. I think the Pew Research Center put out some data a couple of years ago that about 54% of people in a congregation are impacted by suicide. You're either a suicide loss survivor
Hmm.
yourself, you're someone who's attempted suicide in the past, you are someone who is concerned about someone who may be thinking about suicide, or you may be having suicidal thoughts yourself at that point in time. And so you have these people in your congregations, and what I try to do is help them to know how to talk to those individuals, how to recognize the signs and symptoms of someone struggling, but then how to give them something other than just scripture. We
Right.
don't try to tell them that scripture is wrong. We don't try to tell them not to give scripture, but we do try to tell them, in addition to scripture, here are these other things that you can share with people to help them through, including resources, formal resources in the community. So
Mm,
I encourage faith leaders to learn where those resources are, and also that they don't have to be clinicians,
right.
but they have to at least have the wherewithal or have the humility to say, "This is beyond my area of expertise. I want to refer you to a professional over here who can help you." So, yeah, I think all of those things are things that we have to take into account when we're working with faith-based community. But again, I come back to that point of differentiating between a religious resource and a point of access. The church to me is a point of access because it's a place that understands the
Yeah.
the 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 black community's history.
Yeah.
It's a trusted messenger, and then our role is to give them a trusted message to be able to share with the congregations.
Yes. The point of access is so important, especially when you think about the stat you mentioned.
Yeah.
54% of the congregation is touched by suicide in some fashion. Thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate that. I had a friend say that prayer is a weapon and therapy is a strategy. And you really got to keep that in mind. So thank you for sharing that. To Kia, when I think of your organization, I obviously think of um, our daughter Ella. And because, when Ella died by suicide, my first thought was, I didn't think Black people died by suicide. And when Martha and I met you at NatCon in St. Louis, you just fell in love with your organization. So, would love you to maybe share with us why peer support and community dialogue is so important. Why peer-led care is especially important for Black communities during times of overlapping social and political stress.
Yes, it has truly been one. Thank you so much for having me. And yes, when I met you and Martha at NatCon, it was like an immediate connection. And so I'm so excited to be here. That is a great question. I think I would start by saying clinicians are amazing, right? I've been locked in with Dr. T for almost 11 years. So I've done lots of work with my therapist. But I think peer support comes in because at the end of the day, there are not enough clinicians to go around.
Right.
And then when you want to talk about a lot of Black people only feeling comfortable or preferring a Black clinician, that number gets even smaller.
Mhm.
And so peer recovery specialists, we're great in terms of people who have the lived experience, right? So I myself, I am a loss survivor. I lost my 13-year-old cousin to suicide, and I myself am an attempt survivor. And I was a little girl who often struggled with the thoughts in middle school, and I am in my mid 30s now. And so I remember hearing that messaging, right? That Black people don't kill themselves. Black people don't go to therapy. That's a white people thing, a rich people thing. And I remember when I was released from the hospital after my attempt, and I was re-engaging back in therapy, and I was looking for other people who had similar experiences, but it was still very much so a secret. So I didn't feel like there was anyone that I could go to until I found this amazing peer community.
Yeah.
And I ended up going through the certification process for the state of Maryland. And when I had my first peer job, I remember I was leading a peer support group for a inpatient. And to me, I just couldn't believe it, right? Because I was someone who was inpatient years
Yeah.
prior, and here I am leading a support group. And I remember there was a young lady, and I shared my story and said, "Hey, I grew up in the church, and I was told some of that messaging, you need to pray harder, etc." And I remember, I will never forget. She asked me, she said, "You grew up in the church, you're educated." And she said, "I just lost my dad, and I'm just getting ready to be discharged for a suicide attempt. And you're the first black woman that I've ever met to talk about suicide. And I want to know, how did you find your hope? Because I have none."
Mm.
Now,
Wow.
when it comes to right therapists, right, they are trained differently because they're trained to keep it about the client. But the beautiful thing about peer support, right, we're able to use our lived experience when appropriate to help provide that light in a different way, right? And so I've served on treatment teams, right, where individuals have had therapists, they've had job coaches, and then they have me, right, from the consumer perspective, because peer support, we're able to, I often like to say, sometimes provide light when people are experiencing some of the darkest times of their life. And I think that's why it's so important. And so, even with Black people died by suicide too, we have our Black healing peer circles that are
Mm.
monthly, that people log into to talk about and have conversations surrounding suicide. So many people feel like it's something that they can't talk about. And so it's important that people have spaces to say, "I'm not okay, but not am I not only okay, I'm also struggling with wanting to be here." And it's important to have those spaces and to not feel like, "Oh, the police officers are going to be called on me." That's another webinar, right? But
Right.
feel like I'm getting in trouble for something that I'm struggling, with.
Right.
And people have said that, they've said like, "Oh, this is the first time in my life I felt accepted and reaffirmed to share these thoughts."
Mhm.
They've said, "Oh, I've listened to the podcast. I can't really talk about it with my family, but I've been able to listen to the podcast, and it helped me feel less alone." And then people have even come to the support groups, and they've learned about different levels of care, like partial hospitalization or intensive outpatient, where people didn't realize there were so many types of care. So even having us as a linkage, right,
Right.
to clinical services, because sometimes people may not be ready for therapy, but peer support can be a great first step.
Yes. I can tell you how powerful peer support was for Martha, Solomon, and I, just be in a room sharing experiences, and there's no right or wrong, and there's no guilt or no shame. It's just sharing your experience, and that helped us tremendously. And I've attended a few of your monthly groups, and they're powerful. So thank you for what you do. Really appreciate it. So Jen, I'm gonna come back to you. Got a bit of a practical question, but as a practitioner, how do you navigate being both a clinician and potentially navigating the same trauma or our community or your client is experiencing?
Yeah, so that's real. We are not outside of the trauma we're helping people to navigate. And I think as a trauma-informed therapist, that's a part of it, but also as a Black therapist, because of what, like things like t what Takia just said, like there's not many Black therapists. And then we're also lacking in some of the training and extra training that we can get in certain things. Because of that, it's just a small group. And
Mhm.
so oftentimes I find myself just really making the therapy space really comfortable in the sense of like, it's not all professional. I'm not all just like, I'm just gonna sit here as you're crying. Like, we're gonna get real, right? We're going
Mhm.
to lean in a bit more. And that also includes just kind of joking, bringing in some of those things that are specific to our community so that people can feel comfortable and feel like this isn't a space for you to put on a mask. Like, this is where the mask comes off. And
Right.
so, for that, I don't wear my mask. And
Mm.
so, um, the work that we do like really becomes less about distancing ourselves from what's happening and more
Mm.
about intentionally looking at how we're going to hold that and hold space for it. And so for
Right.
me, that means being grounded in two truths that I'm a member of this community and I'm also a container for care. And so to sustain that, I have to practice what I'm encouraging clients to do. And that's to, for me, notice when my nervous system is activated.
Mm.
And then to shift into creating spaces for my own processing. And so for me, I know that my body holds a lot of things, a lot of the emotion that I'm dealing with. And so I have a massage therapist that I will
Mm.
try to go and see. And if I can't go see her, I'm stretching before I go to bed or kind of
Mm.
doing some things within my body, like putting on a YouTube video and sitting out in my living room with, just doing yoga or stretching of some sort. Because the trauma, the emotion lives in the body. And
Mm.
so getting that out, having some kind of sense of release is really helpful. And then also just like what Takia was mentioning, peer support is so important. And it's one of the things that we often preach as therapists is like, we need to find your community. And I'm so glad that your organization exists for that, Takia. It's really phenomenal. And so for me, I'm looking at what my spaces are. I have a very tight-knit community that exists of people who can hold space for me and not try to come and correct or try to shift me into believing what they want me to believe or whatever. It's really just about, hey, we're here for you. And then we trade that off, right? We're here to support each other, but there's no, hey, you need to check your stuff at the door while I come in with my stuff. Like, no, everybody has room. There's room for everybody. And so I also am mindful of the role in the room isn't to be unattached from the trauma and to be remained resourced enough to sit through someone's, experience in their story. And so there are things that we learn as therapists to kind of help us regulate as we're listening, right? I don't want to act as if it's not impacting me, but I also don't want to take up the space of it, right? And so it might be as simple as someone is sharing their story or sharing something that they're experiencing, and I might go, whew, I am feeling the tension here in my
Mm.
chest as you're sharing. And I know
Mm.
what that's communicating to me. And I want
Yeah.
to shift to you. Are you noticing something within you that you're feeling? What's
Mm.
coming up for you? And let's make space for that. Right. And so I'm naming to them that I'm human. I feel things too, but I'm
Mm.
also helping to model that it's okay to stop and pause and notice what our body is trying to communicate as well and to make some space for that. And so,
Mm.
culturally responsive care, it doesn't require that we just are the same. It just requires some regulation in making space and room for everybody. And so instead of pretending I'm unaffected, I focus on staying anchored and show up with empathy. Without being overwhelmed. And I think that's important in my role so that people don't feel like I'm taking up all the space. And so that allows me to be both human and helpful. And that's something that I think is really important in these spaces. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Human, helpful, and being empathetic. Is that what you mean by not wearing masks as well?
Yeah, yeah. I think we wear I think and in the therapy world, a lot of us therapists see this where there's just this kind of like I'm here, I'm wearing this
Yeah.
mask, I'm,
Right.
I'm not human. I can't say, hey, is it okay that I give you a hug? Or would
Right.
you like, all of those things? Or let me hand you the tissues, or
Right.
let me come and sit next to you as you're experiencing what you're experiencing. And so as we take off our mask, it also
Yeah.
helps our clients to also remove
Yeah.
the mask that they think they need, like coming in. And I tell my clients all the time, like in the first session, and I remind them over and over, please take up as much space as you need. Like I can have this
Mhm.
little chair and corner that I'm sitting in. I have my own therapist that I'll go to and will help me. But
Yeah.
for you, you take up as much room. And I sometimes
Yeah.
have them just like stretch out their hands and like feel what it feels like to take up the space in here and
Yeah.
to maybe lay on the couch or just come in and plop down, whatever it looks like. If you need to scream, if you need to yell, like there's room for that.
Mhm.
Everything, it's welcome, just as long as we're not harming you or not harming someone else. And so, yeah, of
Thank you. That's powerful. Thank you so much.
course.
Autumn, I'm going to come back to you now. From your perspective as a coach, how can the sports industry better respond in real time to mental health crises as they arise, both to support the individual athlete and to shift culture around the mental health environments in sports?
That's a great question. I think a lot of piggybacking off of what Jennifer said, it's creating that environment, right? It's having those conversations very early on and saying, hey, like this is a safe space. We are all navigating, especially when it comes to the performance world, we're
Mm,
all navigating these high pressure and extremely stressful like times together. And so making sure that they know and they are repeated to, hey, like this is a safe space. We're kind of linked in the way of it affects us all differently based off of our responsibilities, right? But at the end of the day, we are all going to step through this together. And so whether that be having those conversations and being vulnerable too, like taking not wearing the
mm,
mask, like Jennifer said, in order for them to see it being done in real life, real time, you have to then be vulnerable yourself and say, hey, like I've had these struggles as well, and sharing your story in that. And then like to build off in actionable steps off of that, it's having the training for these athletes through the NFLPA, through you guys,
mm,
through a
mm.
coaches association. So everybody's on the same page. I think
Right.
that would really help benefit everyone in order to be able to respond in real time a little bit more because you're having these actionable steps of saying, hey, okay, here's how we create this environment. Here are the topic conversations that we're starting and we're having throughout the year. When
Mm,
they leave
mm,
us in this off season and then they come back in April to June, we're having that time because that's a lot of times we're getting new faces and then they go
mm,
away
mm.
again and then they're coming back for training camp and then we're together until hopefully February a lot of the time. But
Right.
I think it's really having those types of conversations, being vulnerable, and then having that individualized training for each individual athlete, knowing the relationships that you're building and who they feel comfortable with. And then from there, bringing those people in whenever they're feeling heavy. It's just bringing those
Yeah.
people that they feel comfortable around, making sure
Yeah.
they have them in their corner, and then directing them to the mental
Mm,
health professional and
right.
going from there. But I think
Yeah.
all in all, building that environment is the most important part.
And so you mentioned safe space, comfortable, supportive environments, and then
Mhm.
people modeling the behavior so they can be vulnerable and share with the person who's in need the resources available. Those are excellent comments. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Appreciate it. So, Vic, I'm gonna come back to you. And drawing on your experience working across public health systems, what would a trauma-informed, culturally responsive public health response look like if it were designed by Black communities rather than for them?
That's a loaded question right there. So, I think it starts with a recognition.
Mm,
Because what would be different if it were coming from the Black community versus what we've seen historically is that we recognize that the system is inherently inequitable. And
mm,
so when you recognize that the system is inherently inequitable, that means that everything that you do, every decision that you make, every policy decision, every resource decision that
mm.
you make it through that lens. And so
Yeah.
you know that with everything that you do in this space, you are either fighting inequity or you are perpetuating inequity. And so
Mm,
we have to lean into um, to fighting that inequity. It also means that if you're thinking about trauma-informed care from a Black perspective, you also have to take into account the entire Black experience. It cannot be just this is what because from other people's lens, and I think the operative word there is lens, because we often talk about doing things through the lens of equity or through the lens of lived experience, and the problem with that is that your lens is still your interpretation of what you think I need or what you think I want.
Yes.
But if we are designing it, then we're designing it with the voice of equity. We're designing it with the
Mm,
perspective of equity. And so I
right.
think if we are designing it, it looks very different. It takes into account the whole Black experience, not just what you see walking around the street, but also the recognition that when I look in the history books, I see people who look like me that were slaves.
Mhm.
And then today, I see a lot of people who want to pretend that never happened.
Right.
All of that is a part of the Black experience of
Mm,
people living in America. Also, you have to take into account the way that we have been socialized. I have been socialized as a Black man that you keep your head down, you keep your mouth closed. You don't go talking to people about your
mm,
problems if you want to survive in America as a Black man. So all those
mm,
things have to be taken into account. And then we'd have to acknowledge that that there's been that we've experienced systemic racism.
mhm.
We'd have to acknowledge anti-blackness as a
Right.
very real thing, and that historical trauma. Uh, Understanding that and taking that historical trauma into account has to be foundational to understand the mental health of Black people. And those interventions would also have to center on building trust with the community because historically, people of color have not had a lot of reason to trust systems and particularly not a mental health system
Right.
because part of the problem with the mental health system historically has been that it has not people like that look like me have not been able to see themselves in the resources. We talk about evidence-based practices, and
Yes.
I'm trained as a clinical social worker, so I am, I fully embrace evidence-based practices, but I also acknowledge that there's very little evidence based on people who look like me. So
Mhm.
there's not a lot of evidence-based practice that's based on the Black experience. So
Mm,
part of what we'd also have to do is we'd have to create resources that take into account not just evidence-based practices, but those community-informed practices. What
yeah.
has been working in communities? Because we've been surviving some kind of way
Mm, right.
without those resources. And one
Right.
of the things that has happened historically is, when I look at the community I grew up in, Black male, rural North Carolina, growing up in a, in a faith-based household, there was a narrative that was fed to me either based on my being Black, based on my being in a religious household, or based on my being in a rural household. All of those things told
Right.
me mental
Yeah.
health has nothing to do with you. You pull
Yeah.
yourself up
Yeah.
by your bootstraps or you get in your prayer
Yeah.
closet, but you
Yep.
don't go and talk to someone. And so we'd have to
Mm,
untangle and unravel all of that. But part of it coming from a Black perspective is also understanding how we got to this place
mm,
because there were no organizations when I was growing up saying, no, this is about your community. There was
mm,
no
mhm,
AFSP, there was no MHA, there was no NAMI. None of these organizations were reaching into my community and saying, no, this is about you. So we formed a narrative that it is not about us. And you
right.
reinforced that narrative because if it was about me, you'd be telling me it was about me. But when I
Mhm,
don't see anyone who looks like me in your resources, then I have to assume I'm not your target audience. And so part of what has to happen again is creating resources where people can see themselves in those resources, not
mm,
creating resources and saying to people, you can find yourself to these in these resources. And if you can find yourself, we can help you. No, I
mm,
need to see myself in the resources. So all those
yeah.
things have to be taken into account if we're talking about creating it from a Black perspective. And then the,
Mm,
the other thing, and maybe the last thing I'll touch on is, and I know, and I forget what I think it was Jennifer that was talking about, how you have to find your baseline. And I think one of the things that we also have to consider is that in a lot of ways, the baseline for the Black community is different
mm,
because we
yeah.
have always had to adjust to a baseline that was not built for us.
Right.
You listen, for example, when someone says, the narrative that this Black man got shot by a law enforcement officer or got shot by a white homeowner, uh, and a reasonable person would have had the same concern. Well, maybe a reasonable white person would have had the same concern, but a reasonable Black man, I would not have thought that Black man walking down the street was a threat to me.
Right.
And so our baseline can be a little bit
Yes.
different
Yeah.
because we are always having to watch out for who thinks that I'm doing something I should not be doing,
Right.
and who thinks my kids are doing something they should not be doing. Who thinks that my son, and I have a 13-year-old son who's, he's up here now, wears a 13 and a half shoe, and he is the calmest. I mean, you
Mhm.
look at him straight, he's gonna start crying, but he's gonna be considered a threat by somebody. I
Yes.
have to carry that. And
Yes.
so when we're talking about trauma-informed care through the lens
Mhm.
of a black person,
Mhm.
it looks different than
Yeah.
trauma-informed care through the lens of a white person because a lot of the trauma that has been inflicted upon black people has been as a result of a system that was not designed to
Right.
help us to benefit and to get ahead. And so
Right.
all of those things have to be built into it.
Yes, that's a whole webinar by itself. I mean, unraveling the narrative, trauma-informed care, community-informed practices. Excellent. Thank you so much. Wow, appreciate that. Um, uh, Key, I'm gonna come back to you now to wrap up the individual discussions before we come back to a final group question, which is you've spoken powerfully about mental health stigma in the workplace in particular, and how can organizations move beyond performative wellness to truly support Black employees navigating trauma, depression, and suicide ideation?
Yes, I'm gonna give my 2 cents and then I'm gonna popcorn it to the clinician, okay? Because I understand my lane.
Oh,
Um,
go for it.
so I have a few thoughts. I think part of it is I will say it's nuanced because it does depend on the type of organization, right? What we could do as a small grassroots nonprofit is different what a corporation can do
Amen. Yes.
in terms of
Yes.
resources.
Absolutely.
So I think, and I was like, let me make sure I take notes. I'm a PhD student, so I got to make sure I'm prepared. And so I will say one of the things that stands out to me is making sure that employees are paid so they can actually survive.
Yeah.
I've noticed, right, sometimes that, not sometimes, many times, people treat right trauma or suicide prevention and mental health challenges as a individual problem. It is not an individual problem. It is a collective. It is
Yes. Yes.
structural. Like when we're talking about things that has happened specifically to the Black community, so not being able to pay your bills would likely cause trauma, would get someone to a place of suicidal desperation, right? Can cause depression, or if someone already has mental health challenges, right, make it worse. So I think that's something that's important. And then two, outside of just mental health events during mental health months, do
Mhm.
employees actually feel supported in talking about their mental health challenges, and not just talking about it, but connecting them to the resources that
Right.
they need. So I know sometimes they have, like, right, the EAP
Right.
line,
Right.
but are there spaces what are there infinity groups that one
Yes.
might have where they have safe spaces to actually talk in the
Yes.
workplace? What about their workload? Are they supported? And then
Mhm.
even looking at people who are in leadership, leaders go through a lot that people don't know about. And so even making sure that people who are holding leadership roles and managing departments, right, that they actually have spaces and that they are supported, because a lot of times the resources tend to be focused on, right, the employees, but they often forget about those who are in leadership and carrying a
Yes.
lot. So I don't
Yeah.
know. Vic might want to add to that. Might want to add to that.
Open, Jen, Vic, anything you want to add?
Um, just being honest, it is very hard in those spaces, especially because we live in a capitalistic society, to make this really happen in the way that it truly can,
Mm.
because we're always running up against this idea that I need to make my money. I need
Mm.
to have my product, um, be successful for me, right? And so oftentimes I think the real goal is the work-life balance. And that from a somatic and polyvagal, which is nervous system standpoint, means that do we create an environment a work structure, even a job description that allows for someone's nervous system to be regulated and to
Mm,
seek and find that regulation?
right,
Can they take off time and still get paid so that they can pay their bills?
right,
Can a woman go off and have a baby and not have to worry about how much time she has saved up in order to go off and have that child, right? Is she constantly thinking about when she has to come to work, or are we creating an environment where, sis, you got a year, stay home with your child and you let us know what you want, right? And unfortunately, that just doesn't really exist. And the
mm,
people and the companies that have kind of done like little, I guess, experiments with this have shown that it can be done, but the
right,
risk is that, oh, well, I may not make enough money. And so
right,
at the top, this comes from the top.
mm,
And yeah, it's something that clients and I will talk about often because we'll have these little debates and have space for that. And it's just like, okay, yeah, we're sitting in this uncomfortable feeling that the
mm,
system doesn't allow for us to feel regulated.
understand.
And
Thank,
that's hard.
Yeah,
thank
I
you.
think I think also from an organizational perspective too, I think sometimes that what is not taken into account, especially in larger organizations, is that oftentimes the people who need help the most are going to be the least likely to ask for it for
Mhm.
different reasons, especially when you're talking about people of color.
Right,
Because, as a black man, I may be hesitant to say I'm struggling, I need help because I don't want to be classified as lazy or
right,
or incompetent.
right.
A black woman may not speak up because she doesn't want to be labeled as the angry black female who's always complaining about something. And
Mhm.
so I think that, systemically, we have just created a system where we have discouraged oftentimes the people who need help the most from seeking help, whatever the role is, and
Right,
even taking it back again to I think about the churches. One of the biggest struggles I run into when I'm working with churches is that that pastors have not dealt with their own trauma, and
right.
because they haven't dealt with their own trauma,
Mhm.
they may welcome you in the door when you say I'm here to talk about mental health, but as soon as you start stepping on their toes,
Mhm.
they're going to shut it down.
Right.
And it's like most places, the workers in the church are women, the leaders in the church are men. And
Mm.
so when the men don't want to talk about it, they shut it down. And so I think from an organizational perspective, we really have to create a type of environment where people are more comfortable with reaching out for help. And then the final thing I'll say is, again, coming back to men, I think so much of the problem that we run into as especially as black men is that what is often most valued about us has to do with our physical attributes. It's how we perform as an athlete, or how we sing, or how we dance, or how
Mm.
strong and athletic we are, as opposed to our intellect.
Yeah.
And so it makes it hard for I think for black men and men of color in general to be willing to open up and talk about struggles because what you need to see for me, what I'm getting from my organization is that they need to see me performing. They need to see
Right.
me on top of my game. And if I'm not performing and not on top of my game, I'm not going to get the same opportunity to regroup or to get another swing at it like my white counterpart might get. And those are realities that we face, whether we are, talking about, whether we're clinicians, whether we're, peer specialists, whatever it is in an organization. Oftentimes, we are going to be viewed differently, and we're going to be expected to show up differently.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And I'm going to end with the last question before I go to Q&A. This is open to the group. We've had some excellent conversations, powerful. I know it's been heavy as well, but love for you guys to share with us what is giving you hope right now as you think about the discussions we've had and what we're talking about in mental health and suicide prevention. What gives each of you hope? Jim, we'll start with you, and then go Autumn, then Vic, then finish with Takia.
So I've been thinking about this a lot as I've been having discussions with clients in this political climate. And I just always kind of go back to epigenetics, which is this idea that trauma can be passed down from generation to generation in the genes, but also strength can be and resilience.
Mm,
And
mm,
I think about the fact that our Black people have gone through
mm,
the worst, the most horrific things, um, not even only in this country, but in other countries as they were, dispersed for other people's gain. And yet we still find ways to be creative, to have joy, to find that resilience, and to be at the top of, culture, right? People
Right.
look to our community for culture. They look to us for how they should look or how they should dance or dress, what music, the art, everything that we're
Right.
creating is coming from this place of resilience and joy.
Mm.
And I have hope in that. And so just as much as the trauma sometimes is being passed down in terms of the stress, the resilience and the joy and the
Right.
creativity is being passed down as well. And so what we're doing today is is building, is leaving a legacy for those to come.
Yeah.
And so we're here today because of what our past generations have done for us. And so I think even if it's just going to therapy, just to work on yourself, you're leaving such a legacy and you're leaving such a great imprint on the world.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Oh gosh, that is so good. That was so good, Jen. But I agree. I think that what gives me hope is the fact that we are having these conversations and we keep pushing to have these conversations and we're not holding back at all, you know? And I think making sure that we continue to have them and know that in leadership, when you understand like that cultural nuance, that
Yes.
matters. And so
Yes.
making sure that we like throughout these conversations we don't ever back down in that we don't lose our light, we don't dim our light in any capacity, because I think that's so important. But I think what gives me hope is that the more talks that we have like this, the more that we are educating, and then the more that we can advocate, and we can just keep people aware of what is going on, and then we have each other so much to lean on throughout it all. And so I think the conversations and the education are just huge. And so I'm so thankful for this group, and I'm excited to continue on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Autumn.
Yeah, I
It-
think for me, along the same lines, I think it's not just having the conversations, but it's the fact that we own these conversations. We own this
Mhm.
space. That to be invited to this space by a black man to have this conversation where we can have an unfiltered conversation about the things that impact us and our perspective about how they impact us, not chiming in when someone else is talking about it more broadly, but talking about what it means to us. And that I can sit in this space, invited by a black man, and be in community with three brilliant black women talking about such an important subject. That gives me hope because we would not have seen this just a few years ago. And so, it's not just us having this conversation, but we are owning this space. We weren't invited here by somebody else to give the
Mhm.
black perspective. We're having a conversation about what it means to be who we are, to do what we do, to live the lives that we live in this space. And so that gives me hope.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Takia, wrap us up.
Yes, hope, right? It's a simple word, but means so much. And I think honestly, what is helping to give me hope, because I'm honestly going through a very difficult time with grief, right? And
Mhm.
like many of us are. And what has really been helping me during these moments are being intentional with scheduling joy. We schedule
Mm.
our doctor's
Mhm.
appointments, we schedule time you have to write, you got to drop off kids, you got to do all of these things. But I have been so proud of myself for doing that because I will be no good to the organization as a
Mm.
student, as an instructor,
Yes.
as a sister.
Yes.
I will be if
Absolutely.
I'm not taking those moments to schedule joy. And for
Yes.
me, sometimes that is doing boots on the ground for 20 minutes in my living room with my fan, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
it's being in community with people that I love. Sometimes it's taking a nap,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like. It doesn't always have to be this grand gesture of a vacation, right?
Yeah.
It's whatever you need in that moment that brings
Yeah.
you joy. And so I would also encourage my fellow panelists to make sure
Yeah.
as an accountability that y'all are scheduling joy, and that anyone who will watch this later or watching now to also make sure that you're scheduling joy for yourself, because
That's
I
awesome.
think it sustains us.
Absolutely. And we've got several questions. I know we got limited time. We got like three minutes, so because we have to end at 7. But I'm going to go off script here and just share with you real quickly what gives me hope, and that is the fact that despite us losing our daughter Ella,
Mm.
the excellent comments, conversations we're having means that she's still alive and she's helping make a difference. And I appreciate what you guys have done tonight because we are saving lives, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So one of the questions that is in the Q&A is, what are young Black people telling you right now that adults aren't hearing? And we don't have to go around. We just, and if anyone wants to pick that up, that's fine. But love to at least, I thought that was an excellent question. Now we have 3 or 4, but may only get to one. But like, love to hear anybody's response to that. What are young Black people telling you right now that adults aren't hearing?
I think one of the things that I hear I hear directly and indirectly from my sons is today is different. And
Mm,
just because, I was 13 once doesn't mean that I know what it's like to be 13 today.
yeah.
And so it means that we really have to listen to them non-judgmentally and not
Mm,
always try to retaliate and come back at them with what my experience was like. I have to listen to them and hear because their experience is very different.
mm,
And so that I think to me is the thing that's resonated with me the most is, stop assuming that just because I'm older and I've been there that I know all the time exactly what's going on with them or how they should handle it because they live in a different time.
yes. Thank you.
I would say that they often feel lonely.
Mm,
And so pushing and encouraging them to talk to the ones that are right there alongside of them has been really important for me. But I think just getting to know and creating that environment where they do have different pieces to connect on and similarities to connect on because that's how you form bonds and relationships and build that trust so you're able to share your story. But a lot of that is that they're just lonely in this world despite all the different connection pieces that you can have on social media. Like that's so surface level. So they're really
mm,
missing that unique, intimate relationship building because of that.
yes. Thank you.
Yes, and I would add, I know we're on time,
Right.
to not assume that because they don't have adult problems, that their problems are not real to them. Because I
Mm,
often remember hearing sometimes, like, talk to me when you got kids and debt, right? Like, this is stuff that I heard as a child, and adults are still saying that, but like, their problems are very real to them, and they don't
yes.
know what it's like to be an adult. So, that's not fair to make that comparison. And so, making sure that we're giving space for their experiences.
Yes. Yes.
If to hear my wife tell it, I don't know what it's like to be an adult, so I know they don't know what it's like to be an adult.
With that too. What's up with that?
Can I add just one more thing?
Please,
A lot of
please.
times, what I hear from the teens and stuff that I see is that like sometimes they wish they could be pulled away from their
Yes.
games or whatever technology. And so just
Yeah.
kids actually do love a kind of a structured life and a kind of discipline and they're looking to parents to kind of say like, okay, no, we are going to go to this party and you can fall asleep on the couch, whatever, or we're going to go
Yeah.
to this gathering with our family and friends and we're going to have some fun, or you know what, we're going to have family night and we're going to play games and all of that kind of stuff. And so just because they're occupied by their game doesn't mean that they don't want to be pulled into,
True.
family stuff as well.
Mhm.
So that's something I would
Absolutely.
add.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a couple other questions that we will not be able to get to live time. We will answer them and send them out with the recording in the minutes. But I got to spend the next just 45 seconds thanking this excellent panel for your deepness, your love, your conviction, your stories, your experiences, your expertise, and really appreciate what you spent time doing today. And also thank everybody for joining us this evening. We're so glad that you were here as a part of this webinar. And if you want to learn more about how to have tough conversations with your own children and their mental health, we have another virtual opportunity coming up on March 23rd. It's called our Parent University, where we will walk you through how to identify warning signs, how to have tough conversations, how to get the right support you need for your youth, whether you're a parent, coach, or a teacher. But it's called Parent University. We'll be dropping this in the link as well as sending out in the video. But I know we've had some tough conversations, some heavy conversations, some excellent, enriching conversations. And once again, as I mentioned at the beginning, we want to make this a safe space. So if you need any help or resource, please reach out to 741-741 and put in the word huddle, HUDDLE. But on behalf of the defensive line, Vic, Jen, Autumn, Takia, we thank you for your time tonight. Everyone have a blessed and wonderful evening. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.